I'm wondering if somebody can do a wellness check on my brother and his family.
In January 2020, federal agents knocked on the door of a luxury rental home in Celebration, Florida, a town literally built by Disney, where every street looks like something from a storybook. When the door opened, the man who answered was shaking uncontrollably. He mumbled that his wife was sleeping and his kids were at a friend's house. But something was wrong. The officers could smell it before they even stepped inside.
Tony, you coming downstairs? All right. Tony, you upstairs? Everything's all right, man. Just stay calm. Any children here?
I can't remember if they went to sleep last night.
What they discovered upstairs would become one of the most disturbing family annihilation cases in Florida history. Anthony Todt, a respected physical therapist, soccer coach, and father of 3, had been living with the decomposing bodies of his entire family for weeks. And when investigators asked him why, his answer would change multiple times. Before we go further into this case that shook the Disney community to its core, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. These stories matter, and sharing them helps keep the victims' memories alive and reminds us all to stay vigilant about the people closest to us. From the outside, the Todt family appeared to have it all. Anthony and Megan Todt had moved to Celebration, Florida in 2017 with their 3 children, 13-year-old Alec, 11-year-old Tyler, and 4-year-old Zoe. They also had a beloved dog named Breezy. If you're unfamiliar with Celebration, picture this. It's a master-planned community created by the Walt Disney Company in the 1990s. Wide sidewalks, pristine lawns, homes that look like they belong on a postcard. It's just minutes from Disney World, and residents often describe it as living in a real-life fairy tale. The Todts fit right in. Megan, who was 42, devoted herself entirely to their children. She homeschooled all 3, a full-time commitment that meant she was with them every single day. Friends described her as nurturing, organized, and deeply involved in her kids' education and activities. Little Zoe was energetic and curious, always asking questions. Tyler enjoyed reading and playing piano. Alec, the eldest, was thoughtful and mature for his age. Anthony, 46, worked as a physical therapist. His job required him to travel back to Connecticut during the week, where he maintained a practice. But on weekends, he returned to Celebration and coached youth soccer. Neighbors described him as friendly, engaged, and seemingly devoted to his family. The Todts were well-dressed, always polite, and appeared to be living comfortably in one of the most sought-after communities in Central Florida. But like any family annihilations we've encountered, beneath those polished surfaces, there's always cracks that have been forming for years. In 1929, federal investigators began looking into Anthony's physical therapy practice in Connecticut, and what they discovered was systematic fraud. It turns out, Anthony had been billing Medicaid and private insurance companies for treatments that never happened. Patients would come in for one session, and Anthony would bill for multiple visits. Some of the charges were for services provided to people who had never even stepped foot in his office. The stolen money, tens of thousands of dollars, had been funding the Todts lifestyle, the beautiful rental home in Celebration, frequent trips to Disney World, private homeschooling materials. All of it was built on lies. But the fraud investigation was just the beginning. Investigators also uncovered that Anthony had taken out high-interest loans from firms in New York City, borrowing more and more to cover mounting expenses. When he couldn't repay, the firms filed lawsuits. By late 2019, Anthony owed nearly $200,000. The pressure was crushing him. Now it's important to note that despite the fraud charges, Anthony wasn't immediately arrested. He was allowed to continue working while the investigation proceeded. But back in Celebration, the financial strain was becoming impossible to hide. The family began missing rent payments on their home. In December 2019, an eviction notice appeared on their front door. It was around this time that Anthony sent a message to Megan's family. He told them the Todts were going on an extended holiday and wouldn't be in contact for a while. At first, no one questioned it. The family traveled often, and it wasn't unusual for them to take time away. But as the days turned into weeks and Christmas came and went without a word from Megan, her relatives began to worry. Megan never missed Christmas. She loved the holidays. She would call, text, send photos of the kids. But in that year, there was nothing. Complete silence. By mid-December, Megan's family was calling and texting constantly. One neighbor, seeing the eviction notice still taped to the door, reached out to Megan directly. She received a brief, strange reply. Nothing like the warm conversational messages Megan usually sent. Something was very wrong. Megan's relatives contacted local authorities, requesting a wellness check. They explained that the family had been unreachable for weeks, that Megan would never go this long without contact, especially around the holidays. But initially, the police didn't act. There were no immediate signs of danger, no reports of violence, and technically, the Todts were free to travel or disconnect if they chose. Then, in early January 2020, an FBI agent involved in the fraud investigation against Anthony grew concerned. He hadn't been able to reach Anthony either. Phone calls went unanswered. Emails bounced back. The agent contacted the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, urging them to locate Anthony Todt. This time, authorities took the matter seriously. On January 13, 2020, federal agents and sheriff's deputies arrived at the Todt home on Reserve Place to execute an arrest warrant for the fraud charges. They rang the doorbell. After a long pause, Anthony answered.
Tony Todt!
Police!
Tony, come to the door. Tony, you coming downstairs? All right. Tony, you upstairs? Hey, come downstairs, bud. Everything's all right, man. Just stay calm. Any children here?
I can't remember if they went to the sleepover last night.
He was visibly shaking. His clothes were disheveled. When officers asked where his wife and children were, he mumbled that the kids were at a friend's sleepover and that Megan was upstairs, sleeping. But his body language, his trembling hands, the way he avoided eye contact, everything about his demeanor set off alarm bells. The officers made the decision to search the home. Part of the reason was because the moment they stepped inside, they were hit with an overpowering odor. It was the unmistakable smell of decomposition. They climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, and what they found there was beyond comprehension.
I didn't see Megan because she was, the way her blanket was.
You saw the children?
Yeah.
Right. They're all pretty much black.
The two boys, I just saw Zoe's hair.
Okay.
But yes, the two boys are as black as this leather. There's also a dog, so just there may be another deceased.
Megan, Alec, Tyler, and Zoe were all dead. Their bodies, wrapped in blankets, were found in the upstairs bedroom. The family dog, Breezy, was also deceased. The state of decomposition indicated they had been dead for weeks, possibly since late December. The medical examiner would later determine that all 4 family members had dangerously high levels of Benadryl in their systems. Empty bottles of the over-the-counter medication were scattered throughout the house, on nightstands, bathroom counters, and kitchen surfaces. Toxicology reports would show levels far exceeding any therapeutic dose, indicating deliberate poisoning. The medication, commonly used for allergies and sleep aid, had been administered in quantities that would have caused extreme sedation. Forensic analysis revealed that except for little Zoe, each victim had suffered multiple stab wounds. However, the medical examiner's report contained a crucial finding. The wounds were likely inflicted after death. This detail suggested a staged scene, an attempt to create a specific narrative about what had occurred. The actual causes of death involved a combination of the drugging and suffocation, though the advanced decomposition made some determinations challenging. Investigators collected numerous pieces of physical evidence. They found the weapons used, processed them for fingerprints and DNA, and documented their locations. They examined bedding, clothing, and personal items. They analyzed residue patterns and biological evidence. Every piece of the puzzle was carefully preserved and cataloged. One of the most heartbreaking details emerged from the crime scene photos. Alec, the eldest son, was found clutching rosary beads in his hand. This single image spoke volumes about those final moments, a young man seeking comfort in faith, holding on to something sacred as his world ended. The rosary beads, a symbol of prayer and protection, remained entwined in his fingers long after he passed. There were also signs that at least one of the older boys had tried to fight back. Investigators noted a visible scratch on Anthony's neck at the time of his arrest, along with blisters and cuts on his hands. Defensive wounds are common in violent crimes, and these marks told investigators that the victims had not gone peacefully. Someone had struggled. Someone had fought for their life. The forensic team also analyzed the timeline based on decomposition rates, temperature records, and the last known communications from the household. They determined the deaths had likely occurred in late December, around the time Anthony had told Megan's family they were going on holiday. The final text messages sent from Megan's phone were examined, brief, uncharacteristic responses that investigators now believed had been sent by Anthony himself, creating the illusion that his wife was still alive. And then there was Anthony himself. According to the evidence collected and witness statements, he had been living in that house with those bodies for approximately 3 weeks. Neighbors reported seeing him occasionally leave to buy alcohol and food at nearby stores. One neighbor mentioned seeing him take out the trash. Another recalled a brief conversation where Anthony seemed distracted and disheveled but offered no explanation. He had turned off his phone, cutting off communication with the outside world. He stopped responding to messages from family, friends, and even federal investigators looking into his fraud case. He simply existed in that home, moving through the downstairs rooms while his entire family remained upstairs, their bodies slowly decomposing in the Florida heat despite the air conditioning he kept running. When asked later why he didn't call for help, why he didn't report what had happened, Anthony would offer varying explanations, none of which made sense to investigators. He had been seen at local stores, walking the streets of Celebration, even driving his vehicle. At any point, he could have contacted authorities, sought help, or at minimum, left the home. But he chose to stay, day after day, living with the consequences of his actions. And when detectives questioned Anthony, his initial story was both bizarre and chilling. He claimed that Megan had become obsessed with apocalyptic beliefs and was convinced that the world was ending. He said she had been suffering from chronic health issues, Lyme disease, liver problems, and was in constant pain. According to Anthony, Megan believed that the family should leave this world together to avoid suffering.
Tell me what happened.
My wife is, I want to say, chronically ill. The liver issues and all that kind of stuff. And what was told to me is that when people die, they go to different aspects. And then sometimes never meet up in the light energy aspect. Friday night, it was supposed to be a three-step plan. So that we all stay together and go up. One person separated from the other.
He described in disturbing detail how the family had allegedly discussed this plan together. He claimed that Megan had explained everything to their sons, preparing them for what was to come.
You murdered your 3 children.
I know.
You take full responsibility for that?
I don't take full responsibility. Meg was involved, but I don't take full responsibility.
Well, Megan's dead. Where we're at right now is a very sad state. All 3 of your children are dead.
I know.
Your wife is dead.
I know.
You're alive.
Unfortunately.
When asked how he killed his family, this was the chilling response he gave.
She rolled and started squiggling, and I put my hand over her mouth and then put a pillow over top of her. She started to fade away, and I just held that until there was no motion left.
So Zoe's gone, and then what happens?
We go into Alex's room. We're just in there, just eyeing each other, just gaining the confidence. I stabbed him, and he started kicking, was trying to get up, and I reached around with my hand and held his nose in his mouth. We decided that the dog, we went the dog with us, and I was able to hold the knot in her snout and her nose closed, and she went peacefully.
Anthony then told investigators that Megan had harmed herself but didn't pass, and that she begged him to help her. He said he suffocated her with a pillow.
Meg wanted to go. Gave her the knife, and I laid next to her, and she put the knife into her stomach. We were laying there for about 45 minutes. After she stabbed herself, she says, I feel nothing happening. So she decided to go through her liver.
But even as he confessed, Anthony insisted that he had also tried to harm himself multiple times, using knives, zip ties around his neck, and large amounts of Benadryl, but couldn't go through with it.
We didn't get there till, Monday. What were you doing during this time frame? We're talking over 2 weeks.
Trying to kill myself. I tried the razor blade zip tie around the neck, was trying to figure out how to go through and fall the knife in the right direction. In all honesty, I chickened out and cowered it out with a knife.
The entire interview is truly bone-chilling, especially seeing how effortlessly Todt described the murders without showing even the slightest hint of remorse. What's even more disturbing is that he later claimed he would take full responsibility simply because he wanted it done, an attitude that is nothing short of infuriating.
You've upset a lot of people. You guys seem very planned. This is very methodical. Other than the fact about you taking your own life, which I'm still kind of questioning. You take full
responsibility once it's done.
Okay.
If I could decide right now, I would.
Okay, well, we're not going to let you do that.
Then, weeks later, Anthony's story changed completely. In a handwritten letter to his father, he now claimed that Megan was responsible for everything. He alleged that she had drugged the children by spiking their pudding with Benadryl, then stabbed them. When he confronted her, he said, "She harmed herself." He claimed he was simply a witness to a tragedy he couldn't stop. This new version contradicted everything he had told detectives during his initial confession.
This was a personal catastrophe in everybody's life in my family, including myself. I maintain my innocence. I provided for my wife, did everything I could for my wife. She was progressively sick over the years. There were days which were worse, days which were better. She was kept on a pedestal from me. My kids I did everything for them. The weight gain, Ms. Kopko has said, was because I negated myself. 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night because I would be treating my wife, doing for my wife, flying back and forth. I appreciated her medical concerns, and the reason why I would call so much is because Megan would have bad days, and I just needed to know she was okay. It wasn't a control factor. It wasn't any kind of scoping things out or whatnot. It was my fear that something was wrong with her, and I just needed to hear her voice making sure she was okay.
But for investigators, it didn't matter which story was true. The forensic evidence was clear. Anthony Todt had murdered his family. As the investigation continued, a clearer picture of Anthony's life began to emerge. His past was marked by trauma that some believed might have shaped his actions. In March 1980, when Anthony was just 4 years old, someone broke into his family's home in Pennsylvania and shot his mother, Loretta. According to reports, young Anthony heard his mother screaming before the gunshot. She survived but lost her left eye. Anthony's father, Robert Todt, was later charged with attempted murder. Prosecutors alleged that he had hired a former student to carry out the shooting so he could be with his mistress. Robert was convicted and served time in prison, though he has always maintained his innocence. Anthony's sister, Chrissy Caplet, later reflected on how that childhood trauma might have affected her brother. "There's only so much trauma a young kid can take," Robert Todt said in an interview. But Chrissy was clear. Trauma could never excuse what Anthony did. "I never thought my brother could do this, not in a million years," she said. Beyond the trauma, there was the fraud. By the time of the murders, Anthony was facing serious federal charges. He had stolen from patients, insurance companies, and lenders. His entire life was built on deception, and when it all came crashing down, he saw no way out, except one. Anthony Todt's trial began in April 2022, more than 2 years after his arrest. The courtroom in Osceola County was packed with media, members of Megan's family, and community members who had followed the case since the horrific discovery. Over the course of 6 days, prosecutors methodically built their case, presenting evidence that painted a damning portrait of a man who had annihilated his entire family and then tried to rewrite the narrative to save himself. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Anthony's detailed confessions captured on video, forensic reports showing Benadryl toxicity and stab wounds, crime scene photographs, and the undeniable fact that he had lived with the bodies for weeks without calling for help. Lead prosecutor Danielle Pinnell walked the jury through a timeline that left little room for doubt. She presented phone records showing that Anthony had been the last person to send messages from Megan's phone. She showed receipts proving he had been purchasing alcohol and food while his family lay deceased upstairs. She displayed the empty Benadryl bottles found throughout the home and explained how the medication had been used to sedate the victims. Medical examiners testified about their findings, carefully explaining the toxicology results and the nature of the wounds. Digital forensic experts presented evidence from Anthony's computer and phone, including searches he had made in the weeks leading up to the murders. Neighbors took the stand, describing Anthony's strange behavior in the days after the deaths, how he had been seen leaving the house, appearing disheveled, but offering no explanation for his family's absence. Anthony's defense team faced an uphill battle. They tried to suppress his initial confessions, arguing that he was in severe emotional distress and not thinking clearly when he spoke to investigators. His attorneys claimed that the interrogation had been coercive and that Anthony had been manipulated into making false statements. They also attempted to argue that the bodies were too decomposed to conclusively determine cause of death, suggesting that reasonable doubt existed about exactly what had happened in that bedroom. But the prosecution countered with a devastating series of questions that cut to the heart of Anthony's changing story. If Megan was truly responsible, as Anthony later claimed, why didn't he call the police immediately? Why didn't he intervene to save his children? Why did he stay in that house for weeks, living among the remains of his family, buying groceries and alcohol as if nothing had happened? Why did he turn off his phone and avoid all contact with the outside world? And perhaps most damning of all, why did his story change so dramatically between his initial confession and his later claims? The defense had no satisfactory answers. Anthony himself took the stand, attempting to explain his actions, but his testimony only reinforced the inconsistencies in his narrative. He appeared detached at times, struggling to maintain eye contact with jurors. When pressed about specific details, his answers contradicted earlier statements he had made. Despite his claims of innocence and his attempts to blame Megan, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a verdict. On April 14, 2022, Anthony Todt was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty for the death of the family dog, Breezy. As the verdict was read aloud, Anthony stood motionless, showing little visible emotion. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional year for animal cruelty. The consecutive nature of the sentences meant that even if one conviction were somehow overturned, Anthony would still spend the rest of his life behind bars. His father, Robert, immediately criticized the verdict in a statement to the press, arguing that his son's confession should not have been trusted and that the case had been mishandled from the beginning. But for the community of celebration, for Megan's family, who had sat through every moment of the trial, and for everyone who had followed this case from the beginning, the verdict represented justice. Like the way we create these videos, and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.